Welcome back to the shed, and today we've got a real classic in. We've got an Olympus 35 RC rangefinder camera in from the 1970s. Olympus produced I think about 3 of these models in the 70s, and they really were a classic camera, a very nicely made all metal and glass camera. It's a 35mm fixed lens, double image coupled rangefinder camera with both auto and manual exposure, mechanical focus and mechanical shutter selection. The camera also features both auto and underexposure lock, so it's quite foolproof once it's actually in auto mode. It's believed to be one of the smallest, if not the smallest, rangefinder ever produced with both auto and manual exposure, and measured a mere 109 by 70 by 50 millimeters, and weighs in at just quite an incredible just 417 grams or 14.7 ounces, which is really light for this type of camera. Features very bright 0.06 magnification viewfinder with a separate light gathering window here for the actual framing of the picture. Both the shutter speeds and apertures settings were visible in the viewfinder, which was really rare in a 1970s mechanical rangefinder, and it's worth noting that even a Leica M6, it can't actually match that for that feature. Featured a Zuiko 42mm f2.8 lens, 5 elements in 4 groups and coated in blue and amber. Very sharp lens, incredibly sharp lens. And in its day, you know, this could often match, if not exceed, an SLR camera, and even today can produce a very sharp image. Focuses from 0.9 of a meter to infinity. Filter thread size, which this camera has a Olympus skylight filter fitted. It's an odd size actually. It's 43.5 millimeter. But it has an unusual 0.5mm thread pitch. That makes sort of like getting filters today quite difficult. So the only ones that really fit are the quite rare original Olympus ones. I was quite lucky that this camera actually came with a skylight filter fitted, but you know, they're quite difficult to get hold of now. 6-speed shutter. It's a 2-blade mechanical shutter, ranging from a maximum of 0.05 of a second down to 1/15 of a second plus bulb stop. To be fair, you know, 1/500 of a second is probably a little bit fast, really, I'd have thought, for a 2-bladed shutter. So I would say more likely probably 350 to 400 of a second is probably more like realistic for that. What also is worth noting is that if you fix an electronic flash, and it does have an X flash hot shoe there, but flash sync is actually available at all speeds, including up to the maximum of 0.05 of a second, which is quite good. Light metering, as I say, it has built-in auto exposure. Light metering is by a little CDS light sensor cell, which is just located there on the camera. It's quite good because it's actually right next to the actual objective lens, which means, as in with this camera, when you've actually got a filter fitted, your actual light metering is actually metered through the filter, so it takes that into account. Okay, it's a CDS light sensor, which, if my memory serves me correctly, stands for cadmium sulfide photoresistor, I think. something like that. So it was a CDS, and this controls a galvanometer needle, which is actually located somewhere in the bottom of the camera there, and it's a trapped needle affair, where obviously it's basically an electronic light meter, which would have a little lever there which traps the needle. So it's a trapped needle mechanism, and it's connected to the little needle there in the viewfinder. It's indirectly connected by electrical connection. It's a good system, certainly very good in its day, being both part electrical and part mechanical. it can be considered perhaps a little bit slow compared to modern day full electric systems. So if you're used to a modern camera, with this camera you just have to sort of take a little bit more time to allow for the actual system to sort of work. Fuel advance on the back of the camera there, it's just a manual ratcheted affair, stamped steel metal thumb lever. The camera does feature, which unfortunately on my model here it's actually broken. There should be a lever that comes out here. My one actually has always been snapped off, but it does feature a 10-second mechanical timer, which is quite a good feature. These cameras, pretty much like most stock cameras from the 70s, they do feature the mercury battery problem, and this one's no exception. It does take a cell battery, just fitted to that, just under there. Problem you've got is that the original batteries, as I say, they were mercury, and those are now illegal. You can't buy those anymore due to environmental issues. They can't be recycled, they're quite bad. So it's a real bad boy of a battery actually. It was originally a mercury 1.35 volt PX13 cell, and I say these are now both banned in Europe and in USA, which is a pity really, because they actually had a very even and reliable discharge right throughout their actual life cycle, which was perfect for the very early CDS cells that you actually find in these 1970 cameras. A modern equivalent battery is a Wayne PX625, which is also a 1.3 volt, and that's a zinc airtight battery, and that holds a steady voltage discharge throughout its cycle. A couple of problems with that: they only work really for around about 2 to 3 months depending on the time of year, and in the UK they cost somewhere between £7 and £9 each, which is quite expensive really. Another cheaper alternative is to use a silver oxide cell, which also does not suffer from voltage drop, but unfortunately these are only available now in 1.55 volts, which means the camera would have to be professionally recalibrated to maintain the correct exposure. That is possible, and certainly if you're intending to use one of these quite regularly, that probably in the long term is probably how you're going to sort of save some money. Lastly, if you just have one of these cameras and you just want to test it, you can use a alkaline battery, which is a P625A, but unfortunately that is also a 1.5 volt, which means that to maintain the correct exposure you would need to have the camera recalibrated again, but that's not really worth it, although, because with an alkaline battery they unfortunately do not hold a steady charge, which means as the voltage discharges, so also the auto exposure readings will be altered. So that's not really recommended for taking any photos, but quite handy if you just want to pop a cheap battery in just to actually see if your camera you have is actually working. Okay, we'll just have a little quick look around the camera. The first outer ring on the lens here adjusts your ISO, or the ASA setting. I believe it ranges from 800 down to 32, I believe, which is quite a nice sort of range. So of course you would then adjust that. Very good viewfinder on these cameras. Very nice and bright. It's also polarized. And what is quite good is the rangefinder dot, or rangefinder spot. It does not flare in bright sunshine. I've used this on holiday in bright sunshine and there's no flare at all. What happens with a rangefinder camera is when you actually look through the viewfinder, you have a little spot in the middle of the actual camera, and you'll get two images that converge like this, and you quite simply line them up till you have an actual perfectly aligned image, and then you've got focus. I'll just see if I can actually get a little picture through the viewfinder on the camera. So here we go. This is actually through the viewfinder. You can see the two scales on the actual top and bottom. Top one actually indicates your actual shutter settings, and the bottom one, when the shutter is depressed, that shows you actually at what aperture the camera is actually going to be taking a picture. Okay, here's a printer of the actual what you see in the viewfinder, a little bit more detail. As I was saying, you have the top scale here, which shows you your shutter speed, and this works on a mechanical needle system. It doesn't require a battery for that actually to work. And on the bottom there you have your exposure. That just basically in auto mode, when you actually push down on the shutter, you'll see the needle come across, and that will show you what the camera is actually going to, obviously what settings the camera is going to use. In manual mode you can use that simply as a light meter. You can just hold the shutter halfway down and you can read off the actual aperture setting, and you can actually adjust that accordingly. In the center section there, that's where your two images will overlap, and you'll attain focus, and you've just got little kind of like markings here and there, which is your parallax correction markings. Okay, so taking a photograph with the 35RC, very simple. Much like the Olympus trip, you'll see that the actual first aluminium ring closest to the body of the camera has a little red A on it. That's your automatic mode. So you'd set that to automatic, which that controls the exposure. That's now fully automatic. So all you need to worry about is setting your shutter speed, which was this dial here, which was 500 to 15 or B stop. So you should set that. Then you could frame your subject and you achieve focus via the rangefinder way. So that was fine. And then basically that was it. You would just fire your shutter like that, and away you go. You know, quick, simple, easy. You could veer off the auto setting and you could go on to manual setting. You've got full manual control over the actual aperture there, and unlike the trip, you've also got full actual shutter speed control. You could frame a subject, and if you held the actual shutter release halfway down, you could actually read off the aperture setting in your viewfinder. If not, just use one of these little pocket actual light meter, and that was as good as. To use a electronic flash, it was just a simple case of slotting your flash unit in there just into the hot shoe flash bracket. If you wanted to use remote flash, or you didn't have a flash but a hot shoe, then it has a little PC socket just in there. It has an auto exposure as well on the flash, which is pretty good actually. You've got another little tiny little lever there, which you just set your subject's distance on the actual aluminium ring again. I don't know if you can make that out. It has a little flash symbol, and then there you are. That would automatically meter the flash for you. The only last thing to mention, because I'm running out of time now, is that quite a unique feature really. When you actually came to actually insert in the 35mm film, normally on most cameras your wind-on spool here would actually raise, but this camera it's actually fixed, and they've put a rather ingenious little cutout there, which you mean you'd slide your film in quite quickly, snap it shut, and that would be it, and away you go. So there you go, the Olympus 35RC, really a nice camera, available on eBay today. Very strong bidding on these, very strong. You know, you might get lucky to pick one up and possibly £60, but more likely you'd have to sort of budget, you know, probably nearer say 100 nowadays to get a really nice mint condition, but I would say they're worth every penny.